In 1804, a single explosion of gunpowder changed the fate of an entire continent. When 150 Russian soldiers faced a wooden fort defended by indigenous warriors armed with European cannons, nobody expected what happened next. This wasn't just a battle, it was the moment that determined whether Russia or America would control the Pacific. 2 years earlier, 1,000 Tlingit warriors had already massacred 150 Russians in these same waters. The future of the North American continent hung in the balance between wooden walls and iron ships. By the end of this video, you'll understand how a wooden fort withstood naval bombardment, why a gunpowder explosion ended a civilization's dominance, and how this forgotten battle shaped the map you know today. I'm about to reveal 3 things that history books rarely mention: the shamanic prophecy that predicted the battle's outcome with eerie precision, the British ship that secretly armed both sides of the conflict, and the incredible survival march that saved an entire nation from extinction. Picture this: native warriors operating European cannons from behind wooden walls, Aleut hunters fighting alongside their Russian oppressors, a fortress designed by shamanic vision standing against naval artillery. This is the Battle of Sitka, where over 300 souls would perish across a series of conflicts that would determine Alaska's destiny. The stakes couldn't have been higher. Control of the Pacific fur trade meant millions in profit. Dominance over the northwest coast meant the difference between a Russian America stretching to California or the map you recognize today. Every musket ball fired, every cannon blast, every strategic decision would echo through the centuries. To understand how we got here, we need to go back to when the Russians first set foot on Tlingit land, when 2 worlds collided in the fog-shrouded islands of Alaska. If you're fascinated by the forgotten battles that shaped our world conflicts, where wooden forts faced warships and shamans challenged empires, hit that like button and subscribe for more epic war content. Now, let me transport you to the fog-shrouded islands of Alaska, where 2 civilizations were about to collide. The year was 1799. The Russian-American company, drunk on profits from sea otter pelts, pushed ever southward from their Kodiak stronghold. Leading this expansion was Alexander Baranov, known as the Iron Governor, a man whose ambition matched his ruthlessness. His eyes were set on Sitka Sound, the jewel of the Alexander archipelago. But this land wasn't empty. The Kiks, Adi, clan of the Tlingit nation, had called Sitka their home for countless generations. These weren't simple fishermen. They were sophisticated traders who had already mastered the art of playing European powers against each other. British traders from the south, French voyageurs, even American merchants all sought the precious sea otter pelts that lined Tlingit storehouses. Here's what the Russian records didn't mention. The Tlingit had been acquiring firearms for decades. British and American traders, eager for furs, had armed the indigenous peoples with muskets, powder, and shot. Some clans even possessed cannons, traded for bundles of the finest pelts. The balance of power wasn't what Baranov assumed. The fur trade drove everything. A single sea otter pelt could fetch 100 rubles in Canton, more than a Russian soldier's yearly wage. The Tlingit controlled the best hunting grounds, managed sustainable harvests, and commanded premium prices. They weren't obstacles to Russian expansion. They were sophisticated competitors in a global market. Shadow players moved through these waters. British ships like the Unicorn appeared in Sitka Sound with suspicious regularity, their captains maintaining careful neutrality while selling weapons to anyone with pelts. French traders whispered intelligence between villages. American vessels probed for weaknesses in Russian claims. Everyone knew conflict was coming. The power dynamics defied simple explanation. Russian colonials possessed discipline and organization, but suffered from disease, supply shortages, and numerical disadvantage. The Tlingit commanded superior numbers, intimate knowledge of the terrain, and increasingly modern weapons, but faced a centralized enemy with naval support. Neither side could claim inevitable victory. Baranov established his first Sitka outpost in 1799, calling it St. Michael's Redoubt. The fortification stood like a splinter in Tlingit territory, its very existence a daily insult to indigenous sovereignty. Tensions simmered as Russian hunting parties depleted sea otter populations, disrupting centuries of sustainable practice. Then something happened that defied all military logic. The Tlingit began coordinating between clans, setting aside ancient rivalries for a greater purpose. But in June 1802, everything changed when 1,000 warriors emerged from the morning mist, their war canoes cutting through the water like knives through silk. Dawn, June 20th, 1802. The Russians at St. Michael's Redoubt woke to their last sunrise. Moving through the morning fog came hundreds of war canoes, each carrying Tlingit warriors painted for battle. Within hours, 150 Russians and Aleuts lay dead, their fortification burned to ashes. This wasn't a raid, it was complete annihilation. The massacre's scope shocked even hardened frontiersmen. Warriors from the Kiks, Adi clan, had united with Haida raiders from the south and Tsimshian fighters from the mainland. This unprecedented alliance brought over 1,000 fighters to Sitka Sound, armed with muskets, spears, and righteous fury. Russian hunting parties were ambushed in the forest. Isolated Aleut camps vanished overnight. The colony's southern expansion had been erased in a single coordinated strike. This is where the story takes an unexpected turn. The British ship Unicorn, under Captain Henry Barber, had anchored in Sitka Sound just weeks before the attack. Trading records show massive gunpowder sales to Tlingit buyers, along with muskets and even small cannons. Barber claimed neutrality, but his cargo manifest told a different story. He had equipped an indigenous army. Baranov's humiliation burned hotter than the ruins of his fort. The Iron Governor had lost men, territory, and face. For 2 years, he brooded in Kodiak, gathering resources and allies. His letters to St. Petersburg dripped with vengeful determination. He would return to Sitka, and when he did, there would be no mercy. The Tlingit, meanwhile, prepared for the inevitable Russian response. Under the guidance of Shaman Stunuk, they began constructing something remarkable. The shaman had experienced a powerful vision, a fortress that could withstand Russian cannons, built not of stone but of wood and earth. They called it No Tlain, the Great Fort. But here's what the Russian records didn't mention. This wasn't primitive construction. The fort's design showed sophisticated understanding of ballistics and siege warfare. Massive spruce logs were laid horizontally, backed by earth embankments that would absorb cannon impacts. Gun ports allowed defenders to return fire while remaining protected. Freshwater springs within the walls ensured siege sustainability. The Tlingit had created an indigenous masterpiece of military engineering. Inside the fort, British cannons commanded the approaches. Captain Barber's gifts had included 4 light artillery pieces, complete with shot and powder. Tlingit warriors drilled with these weapons under the guidance of a mysterious figure. Some claimed he was a deserter from the Royal Navy, others said, a French artillery expert. What mattered was that when the Russians returned, they would face their own European weapons. Baranov spent 1803 gathering his strike force. He recruited Aleut hunters whose families had perished in Tlingit raids, promising them revenge. He bargained for the services of the Neva, a Russian naval frigate carrying 14 cannons and a trained crew. By summer of 1804, he had assembled 150 Russian soldiers and 400 Aleut warriors, nearly 1,000 fighting men when combined with the Neva's sailors. The shamans had predicted this, but not like this. Stunuk's visions showed ravens circling dead trees, water turning red with blood, and families walking into the northern mists. Some interpreted these as victory omens, the ravens representing the Tlingit raven moiety triumphing over enemies. Others saw darker meanings. The prophecies spoke of a great thunder that would shake the earth and change everything. On September 29th, 1804, a Russian warship appeared in Sitka Sound. The Neva's black hull emerged from the morning fog like a sea monster from Tlingit legend, its cannon ports open like hungry mouths. Aboard stood Baranov himself, his wounded pride now backed by devastating firepower. October 1st, 1804. Dawn painted the sky blood red as Russian forces prepared for landing. The Neva anchored within cannon range of the Tlingit fort, its 14 guns trained on the wooden walls. Captain Yuri Lizyansky studied the indigenous fortification through his telescope, noting with surprise the European-style gun ports and strategic positioning. Baranov's force composition revealed careful planning. His 150 Russians formed the disciplined core veteran fighters who had survived Alaska's harsh realities. The 400 Aleuts provided numerical superiority and indigenous warfare knowledge, though their loyalty remained tied to vengeance rather than Russian allegiance. The Neva's crew added another 100 trained sailors who could serve as marines if needed. The landing at Indian River unfolded with military precision. Boats ferried soldiers to the pebbled beach while the Neva's guns covered their approach. But the Tlingit made no move to contest the landing. They waited behind their wooden walls, patient as the tides that shaped their homeland. What the Tlingit did next shocked even their allies. As Russians formed battle lines on the beach, cannon fire erupted from the fort. European artillery, served by indigenous hands, sent iron balls screaming toward the invaders. The psychological impact was immediate. These weren't savages with spears, but a military force with modern weapons. The first assault came at midday. Baranov personally led 400 Aleuts forward, their advance covered by Russian musket fire. The plan seemed sound. Aleut warriors would storm the walls, while Russians provided covering fire. Then came the sound that changed history. Tlingit cannons roared in unison. Grape shot, small iron balls packed into cannon loads tore through the Aleut ranks like a scythe through wheat. Warriors who had come for revenge found only death on the beach. The assault dissolved into panic as Aleuts fled back to Russian lines, leaving dozens of dead and wounded. Nobody expected what the British had done. The cannons weren't just traded, they had come with training. Tlingit gunners demonstrated surprising accuracy, their shots guided by careful powder measurement and elevation adjustment. These skills didn't develop overnight. Someone had spent months teaching indigenous warriors the art of artillery. Baranov himself fell wounded, a musket ball tearing through his arm. Russian officers dragged their commander to safety, while Tlingit warriors jeered from the fort's walls. The Russians abandoned 2 small artillery pieces in their retreat weapons. The Tlingit promptly turned against their former owners. Inside the fort, celebration mixed with grim determination. Warriors painted their faces with fresh designs. Women reloaded muskets. Children carried water to the fighters. They had bloodied the Russians, proven that wooden walls could stand against imperial ambition. Yet everyone knew this was only the beginning. Here's the detail that changes everything. The Tlingit fort held nearly 1,000 people, not just warriors, but entire families. Women and children huddled in cedar plank houses within the walls, their fate tied to the fort's defense. This wasn't just a military position, but a small city under siege, complete with food stores, water supplies, and even ceremonial spaces where shamans maintained spiritual defenses. But the Russians had one more surprise. As night fell on October 1st, the Neva moved closer to shore. Captain Lysiansky had measured the fort's cannon range during the day's fighting. Now he positioned his ship just outside that range, where his naval guns could pound the fort while remaining safe from return fire. The real siege was about to begin. Day 2 dawned with thunder. The Neva's cannons opened fire at first light, their deep-throated roar echoing off the mountains. 14 guns firing in sequence created a rolling barrage that sent 24-pound iron balls crashing into wooden walls. Inside the fort, families pressed themselves against earth embankments as splinters flew like deadly arrows. The fort's genius design now proved itself. Those massive spruce logs, backed by earth, absorbed tremendous punishment. Cannonballs that would have shattered stone walls buried themselves in wood and dirt. The Tlingit had created something remarkable. A fortress that bent but didn't break, that absorbed violence without shattering. But inside the fort, something else was happening. Each cannon impact shook the ground. Children cried in terror. Warriors gripped their weapons with white knuckles, unable to strike back at an enemy beyond their range. The psychological toll of sustained bombardment began to tell. This was a new kind of warfare, where distance and technology mattered more than courage. Day 3 brought a grim rhythm. Naval bombardment from dawn to dusk, punctuated by Russian probing attacks that tested different sections of wall. Aleut snipers crept forward to harass defenders, trading shots with Tlingit marksmen. The forest around the fort became a no-man's land, where death waited behind every tree. The Aleuts made a choice that shocked everyone. Small groups began defecting, slipping away from Russian camps to disappear into the forest. These hunters had come for revenge, but found only horror. Watching naval guns pound a fort full of families awakened doubts about their alliance with Russian power. Then, on the 4th day of bombardment, fate intervened in a way nobody could have predicted. October 4th, 1804, 2:47 p.m. 4 days of naval bombardment had turned the fort's outer walls into a moonscape of splintered logs and churned earth. The Neva had fired over 400 rounds, each 24-pound ball carrying enough force to shatter trees. Yet the fort still stood, its defenders still defiant. Then everything changed in an instant. Inside Note Lane, a group of warriors attempted to move gunpowder from a damaged storage area to safer ground. The powder had been their lifeline fuel for the muskets and cannons that kept Russians at bay. Nobody knows exactly what happened. Perhaps a spark from a cooking fire. Maybe a smouldering splinter from the bombardment. What matters is what came next. The explosion shook the earth like a giant's footstep. 50 pounds of black powder detonated simultaneously, sending a pillar of flame and smoke skyward that could be seen for miles. The blast tore through the fort's interior, collapsing entire sections of housing sending bodies flying like rag dolls. In one terrible instant, the tide of battle shifted. From the Russian positions, the explosion looked like divine intervention. Baranov, his arm still in a sling, saw the smoke pillar and ordered immediate preparation for assault. Aboard the Neva, sailors cheered. The fort's magazine had blown. Surely the savages would surrender now. But wait. Inside the devastation, something remarkable happened. As smoke cleared and the screaming wounded were dragged to safety, Tlingit leaders faced an impossible choice. The explosion had killed dozens, destroyed crucial supplies, and torn a gap in their defenses. Yet warriors still manned the walls. Families still huddled in undamaged sections. The fort could still fight. This is the part they left out of official reports. Shaman Stunuk, badly burned but still alive, staggered through the ruins interpreting the disaster. His prophecy had spoken of great thunder that would change everything. Some warriors wanted to fight to the death, making the Russians pay for every inch of ground. Others looked at their children and saw only futility. The debate raged through the afternoon as Russian artillery resumed its terrible rhythm. Clan leaders argued while women tended the wounded. Young warriors demanded a final charge, better death in battle than slow starvation under siege. Elders counseled wisdom, speaking of clan survival over momentary glory. What happened in the next 60 seconds defied belief. As darkness fell, the Tlingit made a collective decision that would echo through generations. They would abandon the fort not in defeat but in strategic withdrawal. The clan would survive to fight another day, even if it meant walking away from their engineered masterpiece. The evacuation began under cover of night. This wasn't panic but planned withdrawal. Warriors formed a rearguard while families gathered essential supplies. Children were wrapped in cedar bark cloaks against the October cold. Elderly, who couldn't make the journey, said tearful goodbyes, choosing to die in ancestral land rather than flee. Picture the scene. 1,000 people moving through darkness, trying to evacuate without alerting Russian sentries. Babies were given seaweed to suck on, keeping them quiet. Dogs had their muzzles tied shut. Every footstep on the forest floor might bring Russian pursuit. The shamans had predicted this, but not like this. Stunuk's vision of families walking into northern mists was coming true, but under circumstances nobody had imagined. The explosion. Was it accident or destiny? Had the spirits demanded this sacrifice to save the clan from total annihilation? Here's what made the evacuation possible. Tlingit knowledge of hidden trails through the dense coastal rainforest. Paths invisible to Russian eyes led north toward Peril Strait. Clan members moved in small groups, each led by warriors who knew every route and rock. The Russians, focused on their fort siege, never imagined their enemies would simply vanish into the night. Dawn brought a revelation nobody anticipated. Russian sentries reported no movement from the fort, no smoke from cooking fires, no warriors on the walls. Baranov, suspicious of a trap, ordered careful reconnaissance. Aleut's scouts crept forward, expecting ambush at any moment. The Russians entered through the gap torn by yesterday's explosion. Inside, they found devastation mixed with eerie emptiness. Bodies of those killed in the blast lay unburied. The living had been forced to abandon even this basic duty. Scattered belongings told stories of hasty flight, a child's carved toy, a woman's weaving half-finished, ceremonial regalia left behind in the rush. But the Tlingit had left something else. In the fort's center, warriors had planted raven feathers in a careful pattern, a message to their enemies. This wasn't defeat, but transformation. The raven, master of change in Tlingit mythology, had simply taken new form. They would return. Statistical reality hit the Russians hard. The 4-day bombardment had expended over 400 cannonballs and thousands of pounds of powder. Russian casualties included 10 dead and 24 wounded from the first day's assault. The explosion and evacuation meant total Tlingit losses remained unknown, but evidence suggested at least 50 died in the blast alone. Russian pursuit began immediately. Aleut trackers found the evacuation trails within hours, reporting hundreds of footprints heading north. Baranov ordered aggressive pursuit. He wanted prisoners, intelligence, and most of all, he wanted to prevent the Tlingit from regrouping. What followed was a running battle through some of Earth's most challenging terrain. The temperate rainforest of southeast Alaska, with its massive trees, devil's club thickets, and hidden ravines, favored the defenders. Tlingit rearguards ambushed pursuit parties, then melted back into green shadows. The survival march stretched over 200 miles of wilderness. Families climbed mountains, forded icy streams, and navigated tide flats, where one wrong step meant drowning in quicksand. Children rode on fathers' backs, Elders were supported by young warriors. The entire Kix, Adi clan moved as one organism, flowing north like a human river. Mini-battles erupted daily. At Catlian Bay, warriors held a narrow pass for 6 hours, allowing families to gain distance. Near Nakwasina Sound, an Aleut pursuit force walked into a perfectly planned ambush, losing 12 men to Tlingit muskets. The Russians learned that victory at the fort didn't mean victory over the people. Individual stories emerged from the exodus. A warrior named Kachksan carried his wounded brother for 3 days before infection claimed the man's life. A woman gave birth on the trail, her baby's first cries mixing with the sound of distant Russian guns. Children learned to move silently through the forest, aging years in days. The Neva attempted naval pursuit, sending boats to probe the intricate coastline, but the inside passage's maze of islands, channels, and hidden bays made systematic search impossible. Several times, Russian landing parties found abandoned camps still warm, their quarry vanished like smoke. Here's the number nobody expected. Despite everything, the Kix, Adi clan, lost fewer than 100 people during the entire evacuation. Their disciplined withdrawal, intimate landscape knowledge, and mutual support had achieved the impossible. They had walked away from annihilation intact as a people. Perspective shifts revealed the tragedy's full scope. Baranov stood in the empty fort, his victory tasting of ashes. He had won a strategic position but failed to crush indigenous resistance. The Tlingit had demonstrated something that would haunt Russian colonial ambitions. They could not be definitively defeated, only temporarily displaced. From the fleeing clan's perspective, every sunrise brought new challenges. Food ran low. October storms brought freezing rain. Russian pressure remained constant, yet they pressed on, driven by collective will to survive. Elders told stories around hidden fires, keeping culture alive even in exodus. As dawn broke on October 5th, the Russians found an empty fort, but the war for Alaska's soul had just begun. The morning of October 5th revealed the battle's true nature. Russians wandered through the abandoned fort like conquerors surveying a graveyard. The silence was oppressive. No victory celebrations, just wind whistling through blast-damaged walls. They had captured a position, not a people. Discovery of the battle's true cost came gradually. Russian soldiers counting Tlingit dead from the explosion found entire families killed together. A warrior's body shielded 2 children, his final act of protection futile against gunpowder's fury. These scenes haunted even hardened soldiers, forcing recognition that this was no glorious victory but tragedy wearing triumph's mask. Immediate pursuit operations revealed Russian limitations. Baranov dispatched 3 columns north, each mixing Russian soldiers with Aleut trackers. Within days, 2 columns returned empty-handed, their men exhausted and demoralized. The third simply disappeared, its 30 men swallowed by the rainforest without trace. Search parties found only abandoned equipment and signs of ambush. The Kix, Adi survival in northern forests, defied Russian expectations. Instead of starving refugees, pursuit forces encountered organized resistance. Tlingit warriors had established defensive positions at strategic points, turning the exodus route into a gauntlet of ambushes. Fresh reports reached Baranov daily, another patrol bloodied, another supply train attacked. Founding of New Archangel began immediately on the fort's ruins. Baranov ordered construction of a proper Russian settlement, complete with Orthodox church, administrative buildings, and defensive positions. But builders worked nervously, constantly watching the forest. Every unusual sound brought grabbed muskets. The victors lived like the besieged. Then came what history calls the Jamestown Bay Massacre. 8 Aleut hunters, pursuing sea otters far from New Archangel's protection, made camp on a peaceful beach. Dawn brought Tlingit war canoes. The hunters died quickly, their heads taken as trophies. This message was clear. The war continued regardless of Russian declarations. But the real shock came the following spring. 1805 brought news that froze Russian blood. The massive Russian settlement at Yakutat, 200 miles north, had been reduced to ashes. A Tlingit alliance had struck at dawn, overwhelming the garrison and slaughtering nearly everyone. Only a handful of survivors reached New Archangel with tales of coordinated indigenous fury. The Yakutat destruction revealed a terrible truth. Rather than crushing Tlingit resistance, the Sitka battle had sparked wider indigenous unity. Clans that had feuded for generations now shared common cause against Russian expansion. Warriors who had fled Sitka spread their military knowledge, European weapon use, fort construction, coordinated tactics throughout the region. Death tolls across all conflicts reached staggering proportions. Russian records admitted to over 100 dead at Yakutat alone. Combined with Sitka casualties and ongoing ambushes, Russian losses approached 200. Tlingit casualties, including the Sitka explosion and subsequent fighting, likely exceeded 150. Adding Aleut losses on both sides, the total approached 300 dead, a devastating toll for small frontier populations. Personal stories emerged from both sides. A Russian soldier's letter described nightmares of the exploding fort, dead children haunting his sleep. Tlingit oral histories preserved accounts of the march grandmothers who walked until their feet bled, warriors who gave their last food to children, families separated in darkness who never reunited. Years later, survivors would reveal details that official accounts omitted. Some Russian soldiers had refused orders to pursue fleeing families. Aleut hunters had warned Tlingit groups of approaching danger. Even amid hatred and vengeance, human decency occasionally flickered through the darkness. The forest held a secret the Russians never discovered. Deep in the northern reaches, the Kiks, Adi, had established a new settlement. Using traditional methods, they built clan houses, smokehouses, and defensive positions. Within months, they had recreated their society in exile. Russian maps showed empty wilderness, but Tlingit civilization thrived beyond colonial reach. Archaeological evidence now shows something incredible. Recent excavations at the Sitka fort site revealed that the Tlingit had prepared for possible evacuation well in advance. Hidden caches outside the fort contained supplies, weapons, and ceremonial items. The hasty retreat had actually followed contingency plans developed over months. New Archangel grew into Russian America's capital, but it was a capital under perpetual siege. Soldiers couldn't venture far from town without heavy escort. Supply ships faced constant harassment. The settlement consumed massive resources just to survive, let alone profit from fur trading. Baranov's victory had become an expensive prison. The immediate aftermath's most profound impact was psychological. Russians learned that military superiority didn't guarantee colonial success. The Tlingit discovered that tactical defeat could become strategic survival. Both sides had inflicted terrible wounds that would take generations to heal, if ever. This single moment would haunt Baranov forever, standing in that empty fort, realizing he had won everything and nothing. The explosion that should have ensured Russian victory had instead catalyzed indigenous resistance that would persist until Alaska's eventual sale to America. The battle was over, but the war for Alaska's soul had just begun. Russian America's hollow victory became apparent within years. New Archangel stood like an island surrounded by hostile waters. Fur profits, the entire purpose of expansion, dwindled as Tlingit resistance made hunting expeditions dangerous and expensive. The colony that was supposed to enrich the empire became a constant drain on resources. The 1821 Deer Peace Ceremony marked a turning point nobody expected. After 17 years of intermittent warfare, exhaustion forced compromise. Kiks, Adi leaders met Russian officials on neutral ground. The ceremony itself blended cultures, Orthodox prayers mixed with Tlingit protocols, Russian gifts exchanged for indigenous guarantees of safe passage. But here's what really happened. Economic necessity drove the Tlingit back to Sitka. The fur trade had integrated so deeply into their economy that isolation meant impoverishment. European goods, iron tools, firearms, cloth had become essential. By 1821, clan leaders made the pragmatic choice to coexist with their former enemies, rather than remain in proud poverty. The Tlingit return to Sitka revealed remarkable adaptation. They built a new village outside New Archangel's walls, close enough to trade but maintaining independence. Warriors who had fought Russians now hunted sea otters for Russian buyers. Women who had fled bombardment sold berries to Russian wives. Enemies became uneasy neighbors. When America purchased Alaska in 1867, Tlingit leaders watched with knowing eyes. They had outlasted Russian colonialism through resilience, not military victory. As the Russian flag lowered for the last time, elders remembered the fort, the explosion, the march. Their survival proved that empires could be endured, even if not defeated. Modern Tlingit cultural survival validates their ancestors' choices. Today's Kiks. Adi clan members live in Sitka, speaking their language, practicing traditional arts, governing through indigenous protocols. The wooden fort is gone, but the people who built it remain. Their presence asks, who really won the Battle of Sitka? Archaeological evidence at battle sites continues, revealing new truths. Ground-penetrating radar shows the fort's foundation extending further than historical records indicated. Musket balls found in forest ambush sites confirm oral histories. Each artifact bridges past and present, proving that indigenous accounts deserve equal weight with written records. Philosophical reflection demands honest assessment. The Battle of Sitka pitted wooden walls against steel ships, shamanic wisdom against military science, indigenous autonomy against colonial expansion. That a wooden fort withstood naval bombardment for 4 days speaks to human ingenuity, transcending technological disparities. That its defenders chose strategic withdrawal over glorious death demonstrates wisdom surpassing military honor codes. The gunpowder explosion that changed everything carries multiple meanings: accident or destiny, military disaster or spiritual transformation. The Tlingit view it as necessary sacrifice, the blast that saved the people by forcing evacuation before complete annihilation. Russians saw divine intervention. Perhaps both interpretations hold truth. Alaska's modern map validates our opening claim. Had Russia crushed all indigenous resistance in 1804, they might have retained their American colony. Continued, Tlingit resistance made Russian America unprofitable, ultimately leading to the 1867 sale. The Battle of Sitka's true victor was neither Russian nor Tlingit, but American, though they wouldn't arrive for 6 decades. That gunpowder explosion really did change a continent, not through military conquest, but through its aftermath, the survival march, continued resistance, and eventual accommodation that prevented Russia from securing permanent North American empire. In wooden forts and forgotten battles, history's course shifts on moments of flame and thunder, courage and calculation, tragedy and triumph, intertwined like cedar bark rope, strong enough to bind centuries, flexible enough to survive the storm.